This is Woodman here with another channel message. While we're used to hearing the term Ten Commandments in Christianity, in Judaism they're simply considered to be the first 10 rules out of a total of 613 deeds, which Jews were expected to either not violate or to do, depending on how the rule is worded. Even the word commandment itself is a modern term, that typically these rules are considered to be sayings, which form as guidelines for how you should act as a Jew. This will help you to know how to follow the laws of God. Even some of the translations from Hebrew to English are not precise as we know them today either. For example, the first is, I am the Lord your God. It's really an acknowledgement that God exists. It's not an actual commandment. You shall not make for yourself any kind of idol or brazen image or so forth captures two ideas. One is that we should really never make statues of God because God is formless. Secondly, that idols are usually made of other gods, which means Jews are worshiping other gods besides God, and this is a no no. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Obviously, a name is a very sacred, important thing, and so to misuse the name of the Lord is a big rule not to violate. Honor the Sabbath and keep it holy respects the fact that out of each week you shall give one day to worship and honor to God. Honor your father and your mother is about honoring your parents. You shall not unjustifiably kill anything is means what it says, which means that justifiable homicide is actually not a violation of the rule. You shall not commit adultery refers to either not having unmarried sex or having sex with a person who you're not married to. You shall not kidnap really is something we don't even know about altogether because we always hear it as you shall not steal, but it really means you shall not steal a person. And you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor is a prohibition against perjury, and you shall not covet is the idea that you shouldn't be looking after your neighbor's wife or anything that belongs to your neighbor in terms of property. So this version kind of emphasizes that these specific ethical prohibitions were very specific, particularly with respect to kidnapping, as there was a distinction made in the mitzvah for stealing people as opposed to stealing property, and that the two are not necessarily the same. Within the original context of Judaism, we realize that there are actually 613 mitzvot, and that the 10 just really don't summarize the entirety of Jewish law. We have to look at the framework of the 613 mitzvah, which cover various aspects of life, including ethical behavior, ritual observance, and community relations. This extensive list highlights the rich and multifaceted neighbor of Jewish law, which goes beyond the simplified view of the Ten Commandments in its nature, right? So, in this context, specific commandments, such as those against stealing and kidnapping, are going to have very distinct meanings. The commandment, often translated as "you shall not steal," is generally understood to refer to the theft of property, where, in contrast, the commandment against kidnapping specifically prohibits the act of stealing people, reflecting a profound respect for human dignity and freedom, that people are not just property. This differentiation underscores the depth of Jewish law and ethics, where each commandment serves a specific purpose and emphasizes the importance of justice, compassion, and community well being. Thus, the idea of not stealing people actually occupies a higher level of observance than stealing property because people are considered to be worth more than property. The 613 mitzvah are traditionally divided into two main groups. One are the positive commandments, things which one should do, and negative commandments, things that one should not do. So here are some categories. We have the mitzvah between man and God. These are positive commandments such as you shall observe the Sabbath, you shall make certain prayers, you shall follow certain rituals. And so examples would be keep the Sabbath day holy out of Exodus chapter 20 verse 8. Honor God with sacrifices, Leviticus chapter 23 verse 27. Wear the tzitzit, which are fringes on garments, which comes from Numbers chapter 15 verse 38. And if you've ever seen those little tassels hanging from Jewish shawls, then you know what these are. Then there are the mitzvah between man and man. And these positive commandments would entail behaving ethically towards others, being charitable, and a sense of justice. So, for example, help those in need. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 7. Do not bear a grudge. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Return lost property. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 1, which are things you don't typically hear about in Christianity necessarily. Mitzvah related to rituals and festivals go as follows. We have some positive commandments such as observe certain holidays, observe certain dietary laws, in other words, eating kosher, and different temple rituals. Examples would be celebrate Passover, Exodus chapter 12, verse 14. Observe Yom Kippur, Leviticus chapter 23, verse 27. Maintain kosher dietary laws, Leviticus chapter 11. We also have mitzvah which are related to the land of Israel itself. Examples would be leave the corners of your fields for the poor, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. Observe the sabbatical year, Exodus chapter 23, verse 10. Because remember that Jewish calendar is very different from the calendar we're used to, and there are some cases where an entire year might be devoted to honoring God. Other examples would be believe in God, Exodus 20, verse 2. Love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18. And you thought that came from Jesus first, but that already was in the Old Testament. Study Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. Negative commandments would be do not worship idols, Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. Do not commit adultery, Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. And you should not kidnap, Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. While the list of all 613 mitzvah is extensive and detailed, it is organized into these categories reflecting a comprehensive nature of Jewish law. Each mitzvah addresses various aspects of life, ethics, and spirituality, contributing to a holistic framework for living according to Jewish values. And so, if you really think about it, we could really get in deep in this because the fact that there are 613 of them really can lead us to some situations that some people have probably never even thought about that was actually part of Jewish law. So, for example, you can't wear certain types of wool. You can't have a cheeseburger. And the rule regarding a woman touching a man's private parts are also deeply rooted in Jewish law and are part of commandments that Jews are required to observe. So let's look at some of these to see where we're getting this from and how this exists. So not wearing certain types of wool, that's called shatnez. The mitzvah against wearing certain garments made of a mixture of wool and linen is known as shatnez. This prohibition is based on Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19, and Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 11. The exact reason for this commandment is not explicitly stated, which leads to some interpreting in various ways. Some scholars suggest it's to maintain a distinction between different types of materials, symbolizing purity and holiness. Others have viewed it as a reminder of the importance of certain boundaries in certain aspects of life, that there are certain things that should not be mixed together. In Jewish thought, the mixing of different materials may symbolize a lack of coherence or an impurity, which is seen as significant in maintaining spiritual integrity. Let's look at the prohibition against cheeseburgers that I mentioned earlier, which I'm sure you're probably fascinated about. The prohibition against eating a cheeseburger stems from the combination of meat and dairy, which is forbidden in the Jewish dietary laws known as the kashrut. This prohibition is based on the Torah's injunction against boiling a kid in its mother's milk, and this is found in Exodus chapter 23, verse 19, Exodus chapter 34, verse 26, and Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21. The rabbinic tradition interprets this to mean that meat and dairy should not be mixed or consumed together, just as certain types of wool or garments shouldn't be mixed together. This dietary law is promoting of a mindfulness about what we should eat and how we should ethically treat animals. It's considered cruel to eat the meat of a baby in the milk of its mother. And so this is a way in which we honor animals. We respect that we have to kill them to eat sometimes, but that we should avoid cruel outcomes if possible. Now, what about the prohibition against a woman touching a man's private parts? This is specifically addressed in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 11 to 12, which describes a scenario where two men are fighting and a woman intervenes by reaching out to touch one of the assailant's genitals. This text stipulates that for so doing it, this is such a severe act that her hand shall be lopped off as punishment. This severe consequence shows the gravity of crossing certain boundaries and the importance of maintaining respect in interactions. This commandment underscores principles of modesty, which are known as zuniyut, and the sanctity of personal space. By emphasizing the seriousness of such an action, tradition teaches that physical confrontations should be approached with caution and that all individuals should be mindful of their interactions, particularly in heated situations. The overarching message promotes dignity and respect, reinforcing the idea that personal boundaries should be upheld to foster a respectful and decent society. These guidelines aim to foster a sense of dignity and respect for personal boundaries, reinforcing the idea that physical interactions should be appropriate and be approached with a certain amount of caution and reverence. This prohibition can reflect broader themes of family purity and the sanctity of intimate relationships in Jewish law. In conclusion, these 613 mitzvah collectively contribute to the overall framework of Jewish law, promoting ethical living, spiritual mindfulness, and respect for oneself and others. They encourage followers to engage with their faith in life, embedding spiritual principles into everyday actions and decisions. Each commandment invites reflection on the deeper meanings of purity, respect, and ethical behavior within the Jewish tradition. Going back to the one about treating your neighbor as yourself, which we discovered actually existed in the Old Testament long before Jesus starts to preach about that in the Gospels, reflects the fact that Jesus did say at one point that he did not come to replace the law or change the law, he came to fulfill it. And so we have to be mindful of the fact that Jesus was a Jewish scholar, and that a lot of his ideas, while some considered to be revolutionary, they were really just certain interpretations of existing Jewish law in terms of how we should necessarily go about being part of God's people and Israel itself as a society, how its affairs should be conducted. And so Jesus was very pure about this. Others may have taken the laws so literally that they sort of do what maybe some lawyers do, which is that they look for loopholes in the law and they seek to exploit them. Whereas Jesus promoted for interpreting a law in the most ethical way possible so that we avoid trying to look for loopholes and trying to find ways to skirt the law or get out of the law. If you like this message, please hit like, share, and subscribe. If you're new here, welcome aboard. It's a safe space. If you're returning, I'm glad you're back. I love you so much. You make this channel great. This is Woodman signing off, wishing you blessings of the Most High God and protection if you so deserve it. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.